Well, today we come to the final episode in this little section of Jots and Tittles on what provides the legitimacy to the public offices held by elected officials. And I've premised this whole series on this verse in Colossians chapter 2 that says that all the riches of an assurance that would keep us from inner turmoil and conflict about what's going on comes from our acknowledgement of the mystery of God, of the Father, and of Christ. And if we understand that mystery, we will be spared from beguiling words that would deceive us, or as in verse 8 says, spoil us of those riches or take us captive. So I want to begin today with the question of office. It's not one that we think about much, except that there are offices set forth in the constitutions of the states or the statutes, and people are elected to them. But the original idea of office is actually rooted in Jesus Christ himself. We don't think about that a lot, so I'm going to use these words from John Owen in his book Christologia that says, all Christians acknowledge that Christ's present state is the state of highest glory, of exaltation above the whole creation of God, above every name that is or can be named, and hereon they esteem their own honor and safety to depend. He says, but what we have to look at in this idea of safety and dependence on God is not just that, well, there's God, like the Enlightenment reduced God to a proposition, but he says that in his present state, it is a state of office, power, work, and duty. He leads not in heaven a life of mere glory, majesty, and blessedness, but a life of office, love, and care also. He lives as the mediator of the church, as the king, priest, and prophet thereof, and hereon do our present safety and our future eternal salvation depend. Without the continual acting of this office power and care of Christ, the church could not be preserved one moment. So we need to appreciate that when we go to church on Sunday and we would have a confession of sin and an assurance of pardon, it is because Christ is continuing to exercise the mediatory office of priest on our behalf. And since he is also a king, he is presently exercising all authority in relation to kings of kings and lords of lords. Now, in this wonderful little book called The Golden Key for Life and Leaders, The Idea of Office by Cornelius Sitzma, he was taken captive by the Nazis in World War II, he makes this statement: office has been at the heart of the age-old spiritual struggle of the human race in the various areas of life. Unfortunately, the idea of office has often been repressed for the sake of an institution or a strong and able person. Worst of all, people have fallen under the spell of powerful organizations or great leaders without rightly discerning the question of office involved. Now, he's not here speaking, nor was John Owen speaking of the office of president or the office of Congress, but the understanding of office itself, to which those understandings of office under constitutions and laws should be seen as attached and related to and deriving their own legitimacy from. After all, we find in Colossians chapter 1, with respect to the new creation, that it says this in verse 16, for by him all things are created, that are in heaven and that are in the earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him. Now, I'm not going to take the time to look at the meaning of each of those words, but it is clear that the idea of offices held by men by which some could exercise authority over others despite their ontological equality, despite the essence of them being equal, it's right there We either believe that God created all of these things and he's in charge of all of those things presently now as Jesus Christ, sitting as the ruling king, judging and ruling everything, or we don't. Now, with respect to that, we used to believe what Calvin wrote, and let me share this as I conclude with today. He comments on 1 Timothy 2:2, where we're to be praying that we might, under the magistrates, live a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. And listen to what he said. When I first read this before I went into the state senate, it was both a consolation and exhortation and a solemn reminder of what I was undertaking. He says this: what zeal for integrity, prudence, meekness, continence, and innocence ought to sway those who know they have been appointed ministers of the divine justice. See, we think we appoint them, but God in his providence is behind all things, because in him we live and move and have our being. How will they dare to admit iniquity into their tribunal when they are told that it is the throne of the living God? How will they venture to pronounce an unjust sentence with that mouth which they understand to be an ordained organ of divine truth? Do our magistrates, do our local officials, our state legislators, our governors, our president, our members of Congress, our judges, do they understand that? With what conscience will they subscribe impious decrees with that hand which they know has been appointed to write the acts of God? And then this statement: in a word, if they remember that they are the vicegerents, in other words, they've been appointed, they're serving under the supreme regent, Christ. If they remember they are vicegerents of God, it behooves them to watch with all care, diligency, and industry, that they may in themselves exhibit a kind of image. Remember, we are made in the image of God. That they may in themselves exhibit a kind of image of the divine providence, guardianship, goodness, benevolence, and justice. The question for every legislator should be, having been made in the image of God, am I exercising this office within the bounds established by my Constitution in such way that as one made in the image of God, the people get a better picture of the image of God? And then he adds these words: and let them constantly keep the additional thought in view that if a curse is pronounced on him that, quote, doeth the work of the Lord deceitfully, a much heavier curse must lie on him who deals deceitfully in a righteous calling. This admonition ought justly to have the greatest effect upon them. For if they sin in any respect, of course in relation to their office, but also personally as an image bearer, not only is injury done to men whom they wickedly torment, but they also insult God himself, whose sacred tribunals they pollute. Therein is the legitimacy of office. And as Christ has established his office in righteousness and justice and holiness, that informs within their jurisdiction the legitimacy of the exercises of their power.